Hello and welcome back to Skepticus. I am your host, Adam of Nola. Today we are diving into a fascinating and for many deeply ingrained theological interpretation. We're going to be responding to a video that attempts to uncover what it calls the secret identity of the angel of the Lord. This video, like many others in Christian apologetics, argues that this mysterious figure, the Malak Yahweh, the messenger of Yahweh, is none other than a pre-incarnate appearance of Jesus Christ himself. This is a very common belief within Trinitarian Christianity. It's used to establish a continuity between the Old and New Testaments and to demonstrate the divinity of Jesus even before his birth in Bethlehem. And the video makes some compelling points, to be fair, citing numerous biblical passages that, on the surface, certainly seem to suggest a divine identity for this angel. But here on Skepticus, our job is to look beyond the surface, to examine the assumptions, the linguistic nuances, and the broader context of the ancient texts. We're going to ask, is this interpretation truly the only or even the most natural reading of the Hebrew Bible? Or are there other, perhaps more textually consistent explanations for the mysterious nature of the angel of the Lord? We'll be scrutinizing the evidence, challenging the conclusions, and offering alternative perspectives, all while leaning heavily on the biblical text itself. So buckle up. We're about to put this secret identity claim under the skeptical microscope. Let's roll the first clip.
So far in this series, we've looked at a couple of things. First, that the Old Testament doesn't just hint at plurality within God, it lays down the groundwork for it. And second, that Israel's promised Messiah wasn't just a human ruler. He's described using divine titles, exercising divine authority, doing things that only God does. Now in part 3, we focus on one of the more mysterious, mind-bending, and revealing figures in the Hebrew Bible, the angel of the Lord.
The presenter starts by laying some groundwork, claiming that the Old Testament hints at plurality within God, and that the Messiah is described with divine titles. I'll actually be exploring some of these concepts in future videos here on Skepticus, particularly the idea of a divine council or other gods in the ancient Near Eastern worldview influencing the early Israelite understanding of Yahweh. I highly recommend that you take a look at those videos as soon as I get them cranked out. It's a fascinating look at how a strict monotheism wasn't always the dominant view. However, the assertion that the Old Testament lays down the groundwork for plurality within God in a Trinitarian sense is a significant interpretive leap. While concepts like wisdom or the Spirit of God might be personified in some texts, and we see passages where God and Lord interact, like in Genesis 19:24, which we'll bring up later, interpreting these as distinct persons of a singular God is a later theological development, often read back into the Old Testament. The Hebrew Bible, on its own terms, is overwhelmingly monotheistic in its emphasis on Yahweh's oneness, as expressed in Deuteronomy 6:4, the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. The idea of a complex, multi-personal God is a New Testament, and specifically post-New Testament theological construction. Similarly, while the Messiah certainly has exalted titles and a special relationship with Yahweh, claiming he explicitly exercises divine authority as God within the Old Testament is also often an anachronistic reading. Many messianic prophecies describe a human king, albeit an ideal one, who rules on behalf of Yahweh, not as Yahweh. Think of Isaiah 11, 1-5, which describes a shoot from Jesse's stump endowed with the Spirit of the Lord ruling with justice. This figure is clearly a human king, albeit divinely appointed and empowered. But the central focus of this video and our response today is the angel of the Lord. This is where the core argument for a pre-incarnate Jesus lies. So let's see how the presenter builds his case for this mysterious figure.
First, we need to talk about the Hebrew. The term translated angel of the Lord is Malak Yahweh, literally messenger of Yahweh. But Malak just means messenger. It can be a human like the prophet Malachi, whose name literally means my messenger, or a heavenly being like Gabriel. So when we read angel of the Lord, we shouldn't automatically picture wings and halos. We need to let the context speak. And what do we find in that context? Every time the Bible refers to the angel of Yahweh with the definite article, it's not talking about just any messenger. It's talking about someone who acts, speaks, and receives worship, just like Yahweh himself does. Start with Exodus 23:20-21. God tells Israel he's sending a messenger ahead of them. Pay careful attention to him and obey his voice, for he will not pardon your transgression, for my name is in him.
His central claim here is that this specific Malak Yahweh acts, speaks, and receives worship just like Yahweh himself does. This is the cornerstone of the pre-incarnate Christ argument, and he immediately points to Exodus 23, verses 20-21, where it says, "See, I am sending an angel ahead of you to guard you along the way and to bring you to the place I have prepared. Pay careful attention to him and listen to what he says. Do not rebel against him. He will not forgive your rebellion, since my name is in him." This is admittedly a powerful passage. The angel is granted authority to not pardon transgressions because God's name is in him. In ancient Near Eastern thought, a name represented the essence, the authority, and the very presence of the person. So indeed, this indicates a profound connection to Yahweh. However, the leap to he forgives sins from he will not pardon your transgression requires a closer look. The text says he will not pardon rebellion, which is the opposite of forgiving sins. It highlights his role as an enforcer of divine justice, not necessarily a forgiver. The authority to not pardon is still derivative from Yahweh, whose name is in him. Think of a king's emissary who carries the king's seal and speaks with the king's full authority. To rebel against the emissary is to rebel against the king, and the emissary, by virtue of the king's authority, can declare that rebellion will not be pardoned. This isn't the emissary forgiving or not forgiving based on his own inherent power, but as a direct representative of the one whose authority he carries. The idea of divine agency is crucial here. In ancient cultures, it was common for an agent or messenger to represent the sender so completely that the words and actions of the agent were considered the words and actions of the sender himself. This is a concept we still see in modern diplomacy. An ambassador speaks with the full authority of their nation. To insult the ambassador is to insult the nation. To violate an agreement with the ambassador is to violate an agreement with the nation. This doesn't make the ambassador the president or the king. It means they are acting as a direct extension of that power. We see this principle of agency throughout the Bible. For example, in Exodus 7:1, God tells Moses, "See, I have made you like God to Pharaoh, and your brother Aaron will be your prophet." Moses isn't literally God, but he acts as God to Pharaoh through divine authority. In 2 Samuel 14, verse 17, the woman from Tekoa tells David, "May the word of my lord the king bring me rest, for my lord the king is like the angel of God in discerning good and evil." Here, a human king is compared to the angel of God, implying the angel's role as a wise and discerning agent, not necessarily God himself. So while the angel of the Lord certainly possesses extraordinary authority and represents Yahweh in a profound way, the text here can still be comfortably explained by the concept of divine agency without immediately concluding that the angel is Yahweh in another form. The name of God dwelling in him means that God's presence and authority are there, but not necessarily God's person distinct from the sending Yahweh. But the presenter has more evidence for us, including instances where the angel seems to be worshipped or even explicitly called God. This is where the argument for a divine identity truly intensifies. What about those passages where human characters react to the angel with fear, saying they've seen God? That's next.
God's name is in this messenger. That's big. In Scripture, when God's name dwells somewhere, it means his presence is there in a special way. So God isn't just sending an errand boy, he's sending his very own presence. That explains why Isaiah 63:9 refers to this figure as the angel of his presence. This messenger not only carries God's presence, he also forgives sins. Zechariah 3:4 also records the angel saying, "Behold, I have taken your iniquity away from you." You don't get to forgive sins unless you are God. Now, let's rewind to Genesis 16. When Hagar encounters the angel of the Lord, He promises to multiply her offspring, a divine promise. Then Hagar calls him God. You are the God who sees me.
The presenter presses his case, arguing that the angel forgives sins and that you don't get to forgive sins unless you are God. He cites Zechariah 3, verse 4, where the angel says to Joshua the high priest, "See, I have taken away your iniquity, and I will put rich garments on you." Now, this is a very interesting verse. The angel does indeed declare that he has taken away Joshua's iniquity. However, it's crucial to look at the immediate context. In Zechariah 3, 1 through 2, it is Yahweh who is rebuking Satan and choosing Jerusalem. Then, in verse 4, the angel of the Lord, acting as an agent, executes Yahweh's judgment and purification. The angel is not forgiving sins by his own inherent power of absolution, but by performing the act of purification as decreed by Yahweh. It's akin to a royal decree of pardon being executed by a messenger. The messenger doesn't have the power to pardon in himself, but he carries out the king's pardon. In the same way, the angel is acting as the divine agent through whom Yahweh's removal of sin is manifested. We see this dynamic elsewhere. In Leviticus 16, the high priest atoned for the people's sins through sacrificial rituals prescribed by God. The high priest didn't inherently forgive sins, but he performed the actions that allowed God's forgiveness to be applied. The angel here is fulfilling a similar role, acting as the agent through whom God's decreed purification happens. Then he brings up Genesis 16, the encounter with Hagar. This is a classic passage cited for this argument. Hagar, despairing in the desert, encounters the angel of the Lord. The angel indeed makes divine promises, like multiplying her offspring. That's from Genesis 16, verse 10, which is a promise only God can ultimately fulfill. And then in Genesis 16, verse 13, Hagar says, "She gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her. You are the God who sees me. For she said, I have now seen the one who sees me." This is powerful. Hagar explicitly names the Lord, Yahweh, and calls him the God who sees me, El Roi. The key here is the fluid interchangeability of angel of the Lord and Yahweh. This phenomenon is a hallmark of the angel of the Lord narratives, and it's what makes them so perplexing if one insists on a strict separation. However, again, the concept of divine agency helps us here. The messenger is so intimately identified with the one who sent him that the titles and even the reactions appropriate for the sender are applied to the messenger. It's not necessarily a statement of the messenger's ontological identity as Yahweh, but of his functional identity as Yahweh's representative. Think of John 5:23 in the New Testament, where Jesus says, "Whoever does not honor the Son does not honor the Father who sent him." While Jesus is presented as divine in the New Testament, this verse illustrates the principle. Honoring the sent one is honoring the sender. In the Old Testament context, honoring or even fearing the angel is honoring or fearing Yahweh, whose presence and authority the angel embodies. Furthermore, the Hebrew Bible often uses Elohim, or God, in a broader sense, not always exclusively for Yahweh. While Hagar calls him El Roi, the context of the interaction is clearly with Malak Yahweh. It's possible Hagar, in her awe and terror, conflates the messenger with the ultimate sender, or the biblical narrator is using a literary device to emphasize the directness of Yahweh's communication through the angel. The angel of the Lord appears to be more than just a typical messenger. He is, undeniably, a unique messenger. But whether this uniqueness points to a separate divine person within God or a distinct kind of agent who uniquely embodies Yahweh's presence and authority is the crucial interpretive fork in the road. The presenter will now bring up more examples, including Abraham's near sacrifice of Isaac and Jacob's blessing of his grandsons, where the angel's identity seems to blur further with God. These are rich texts, but do they definitively close the door on divine agency? Or do they open up other, equally mysterious possibilities about this enigmatic figure? We'll find out next.
We get the same thing in Genesis 22. When Abraham is about to sacrifice Isaac, it's the angel of the Lord who stops him and says, You have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. He talks like Yahweh, and Abraham listens to him like Yahweh. Fast forward to Genesis 48:15-16. Jacob blesses his grandsons and says, "The God who has been my shepherd, the angel who redeemed me, may he bless the boys." He uses the singular pronoun to refer to both God and the angel.
These are indeed some of the most compelling texts used to argue for the angel of the Lord's divine identity. Let's unpack Genesis 22. The narrative is famously intense. God, Elohim, then Yahweh Elohim, commands Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. That's in Genesis 22, verses 1-2. As Abraham is about to strike, the angel of the Lord calls out from heaven, that's in Genesis 22:11, saying, "Do not lay a hand on the boy. Now I know that you fear God because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son." That's from Genesis 22, verse 12. Later, the angel of the Lord calls out a second time and swears by himself, saying, "I swear by myself, declares the Lord, that because you have done this, I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars." That's from Genesis 22:15-18. The key phrase here is, "You have not withheld from me your son." This is incredibly strong language, as it implies the angel is the recipient of Abraham's obedience, thus equating himself with God. And the angel, swearing by himself, is also a divine prerogative. Hebrews 6:13 in the New Testament explicitly states, when God made his promise to Abraham, since there was no one greater for him to swear by, he swore by himself. This seems to directly link the angel's actions to God's unique authority. However, again, the interpretive lens of agency can still be applied. If the angel is embodying Yahweh's presence and speaking Yahweh's direct words, then Abraham's obedience to the angel is literally obedience to Yahweh. The angel acts as the conduit for the divine will, so perfectly identified with Yahweh that the me refers to Yahweh through the angel. It's a profound representation, not necessarily an ontological identity. It's Yahweh speaking via the angel, not the angel speaking as an independent divine person who is also Yahweh. This intense identification, where the messenger speaks as the sender, is a feature of divine communication in the ancient world. It's a way of conveying the power and directness of the divine message. Now let's look at Genesis 48:15-16. Here, Jacob is blessing Joseph's sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. He blessed Joseph and said, "May the God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who had been my shepherd all my life to this day, the angel who has redeemed me from all harm, may he bless these boys." This is another incredibly strong piece of evidence for the divine identity of the angel. Jacob refers to God, Elohim, as his shepherd, and then the angel, Malak, as his redeemer, seemingly using singular pronouns to refer to both as if they are one and the same entity providing continuous divine care throughout his life. To be redeemed from all harm is an act of salvation, typically attributed to God. In Psalm 107, verse 2, it says, "Let the redeemed of the Lord tell their story, those he redeemed from the hand of the foe." Here, redemption is clearly from Yahweh. Again, though, divine agency offers a plausible, though admittedly less spectacular explanation. If the angel of the Lord is Yahweh's primary emissary, an embodiment of his presence in the world, then the angel is the instrument of Yahweh's redemption. Jacob, reflecting on his life, sees God's ongoing protection manifested through this angel figure. The singular pronoun usage could be an example of Hebraism, where the antecedent is fluid, referring to the ultimate source, God, even when describing the agent, the angel. Or it could simply be a syndeton, where two distinct but closely related entities are presented without a conjunction, implying a continuous flow of action from one to the other. These passages certainly push the boundaries of simple agency. They force us to grapple with the profound and almost indistinguishable nature of the angel of the Lord from Yahweh himself. But do they require a separate divine person? Or could this intense identification be a unique literary and theological device to convey the presence and the authority of an otherwise unseen God? The next set of examples promises to blur the lines even further, particularly the iconic burning bush narrative and Jacob's wrestling match. We'll also dive into the terrifying account of Sodom and Gomorrah, where the speaker claims to see two distinct Yahwehs. Is this a smoking gun for Trinitarian plurality or a complex narrative that reflects ancient perceptions of divine manifestation? Stay with us.
Then in Exodus 3, the angel of the Lord appears to Moses in the burning bush. But then the narrative starts using God and angel of the Lord interchangeably. The angel calls himself I am, the covenant name of God. Some people argue that this is just divine agency, that the angel is just speaking on behalf of God, not as God.
Wrong.
But this falls apart the moment you see how people react to him. Jacob, after wrestling with the angel, says, I have seen God face to face. Similarly, in Judges, we see both Gideon and Manoah coming face to face with the angel of the Lord, fearing for their lives after the encounter. The fear comes from seeing Yahweh, not just a representative.
This section presents some of the strongest textual arguments for the angel of the Lord's divine identity, particularly the burning bush and the reactions of biblical figures to him. Let's start with Exodus 3, the pivotal burning bush narrative. The text is indeed fluid, almost deliberately ambiguous. From Exodus 3:2, there the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. From Exodus 3:4, when the Lord, Yahweh, saw that he had gone over to look, God, Elohim, called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. From Exodus 3:6, then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. From Exodus 3:14, God said to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. The presenter correctly points out the interchangeability, culminating in the angel, initially, identifying himself with the sacred covenant name of God, Yahweh. I am who I am. This is incredibly potent. The very revelation of the divine name is attributed to the entity appearing as the angel. Now, while divine agency is a powerful interpretive tool, passages like this stretch it to its limits. When the Malak Yahweh identifies himself as I am, it's difficult to maintain a clean distinction where he is only a representative. It feels more like a manifestation, a direct appearance of Yahweh himself. However, it's also important to consider the phenomenology of divine revelation in the Old Testament. Yahweh is often described as dwelling in unapproachable light or glory, as in 1 Timothy 6, verse 16 in the New Testament, Psalm 104, verse 2 in the Old Testament. Direct, unmediated encounters are rare and often fatal. In Exodus 33, verse 20, it says, you cannot see my face, for no one may see me and live. The angel of the Lord could be understood as a mediating figure, a visible Yahweh, through whom the transcendent God makes himself manifest without utterly consuming the observer. He is not a separate God, nor entirely distinct, but an aspect or a mode of Yahweh's self-revelation. He is the presence of Yahweh made tangible. Then the presenter turns to the reactions of those who encounter the angel, arguing that their fear indicates they've seen Yahweh, not just a representative. For example, in Genesis 32, verse 30, Jacob, after wrestling with the mysterious figure often interpreted as the angel or God directly, he names the place Peniel, saying, it is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared. In Judges 6, 22 through 23, Gideon, after encountering the angel of the Lord, exclaims, alas, sovereign Lord, I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face. But the Lord says to him, do not be afraid, you are not going to die. Similarly, in Judges 13, 21 through 22, Manoah and his wife realize they have seen the angel of the Lord, and Manoah cries out, we are doomed to die. We have seen God. Now, these reactions are indeed compelling. The consistent fear of death upon seeing the angel directly aligns with the biblical understanding that seeing God would result in death. This strongly suggests that those who saw the angel believed they were seeing a direct manifestation of Yahweh or Yahweh himself. The text supports the idea that the experience of encountering the Malak Yahweh was akin to encountering Yahweh. So while the concept of agency offers a way to interpret the angel's speech, the reactions of the biblical characters to the angel do indeed seem to point to a direct encounter with the divine, or at least a manifestation so potent it was indistinguishable from Yahweh. This raises the interpretive stakes significantly. Is this a blurring of lines that supports Trinitarian plurality, or a unique theological phenomenon that doesn't fit neatly into either strict monotheism or full-blown polytheism? The next clip will delve into the Sodom and Gomorrah narrative, a passage often cited for showing a Lord raining fire from the Lord, suggesting two distinct divine figures, both called Yahweh. This is perhaps one of the most intriguing and challenging texts for this discussion. Does it provide definitive proof of a multi-personal God, or are there other ways to understand this seemingly redundant divine action? Let's find out.
Then in Genesis 19, we see something mind-blowing. Two angels arrive in Sodom in the evening, which raises a question: what happened to the third figure that was talking with Abraham in Genesis 18? It's pretty simple. One stayed behind, and Genesis 18:22 identifies him as the Lord himself. But then comes the crazy part. In Genesis 19:24, it says, "Then the Lord rained sulfur and fire on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of heaven." Now, wait a second. What? The Lord rained from the Lord? Here we see two different individuals, one on earth and one in heaven, but both are called Yahweh.
This is indeed one of the most mind-blowing passages for this discussion, as the presenter aptly puts it. The narratives of Sodom and Gomorrah, particularly the transition between Genesis 18 and Genesis 19, is often a central piece of evidence for the plurality of God within Trinitarian theology. Let's trace the sequence. In Genesis 18:1, the Lord, Yahweh, appeared to Abraham by the oaks of Mamre, accompanied by two men. Throughout Genesis 18, Abraham converses extensively with one of these figures, who is clearly identified as the Lord, Yahweh, and knows Sarah's thoughts, discusses the fate of Sodom, and hears Abraham's intercession. The other two figures are explicitly called men or angels in later verses. In Genesis 18:22, it says, "The men turned away and went towards Sodom, but Abraham remained standing before the Lord." So one figure, identified as Yahweh, stays with Abraham. The other two, the men or angels, proceed to Sodom. In Genesis 19:1, the two angels arrived at Sodom in the evening. These are the two figures who were with Yahweh and Abraham in chapter 18. Then comes the crucial verse, Genesis 19, verse 24. "Then the Lord, Yahweh, rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord," or Yahweh, "out of the heavens." The presenter interprets this to mean two different individuals, one on earth and one in heaven, but both are called Yahweh. This is a very common Trinitarian interpretation. The Lord on earth is the pre-incarnate Christ, the angel of the Lord figure, and the Lord out of heaven is God the Father. The interpretation certainly provides a clean explanation for the seemingly redundant phrasing. However, there are other interpretations rooted in Hebrew grammar and ancient literary conventions that do not necessarily require two distinct persons of Yahweh. I'm going to screw up this pronunciation pretty bad, I'm sure, but the Hebrew phrase is Miat Yahweh Min Ha Shamayim. While from the Lord can indicate source, some scholars argue it functions as an intensification, emphasizing the divine origin of the judgment. It's not necessarily two distinct entities, but Yahweh acting from his heavenly domain. It's an expression of absolute divine agency and power originating from heaven. As we discussed, the angel of the Lord acts as the visible manifestation of Yahweh. So the Lord on earth in Genesis 18 could indeed be the angel of the Lord, a physical embodiment of Yahweh's presence interacting with Abraham, while the ultimate power and source of the judgment resides in the transcendent Yahweh in heaven. This doesn't require two distinct persons in a Trinitarian sense, but rather a distinction between Yahweh's localized manifestation and his transcendent essence. The angel is not a different God, but God manifested. This is a crucial nuance. Consider other biblical instances where a singular God is described as acting from heaven. In Psalm 18, 9 through 10, it says, "He parted the heavens and came down. Dark clouds were under his feet. He mounted the cherubim and flew. He soared on the wings of the wind." No one interprets this as two distinct gods. It's poetic language for Yahweh's action from heaven. While Genesis 19:24 is less poetic, it could still be an idiomatic way of expressing the singular Yahweh's direct action from his heavenly abode. So, while the Genesis 19:24 verse is undeniably intriguing and forms a strong pillar for the Trinitarian view of the angel of the Lord, it's not the only possible interpretation. It depends on whether one prioritizes a strict separation of persons over the concept of a single transcendent God manifesting himself through an embodied agent. The presenter will now bring up Joshua's encounter before Jericho and Zechariah's visions, both of which feature divine figures receiving worship and interceding, and then pivot to Malachi to solidify his pre-incarnate Jesus argument. These are crucial final pieces of the puzzle. Do they provide the undeniable link? Or can we still see alternative readings that respect the Old Testament's unique theological landscape without immediately jumping to New Testament conclusions? Let's continue our exploration.
Finally, in Joshua 5, right before the Battle of Jericho, a mysterious man appears with a drawn sword. Joshua asks whose side is he on. He says, "I am the commander of the army of the Lord, and now I have come." Joshua falls on his face and worships, and he's told, "Take off your sandals, the place you are standing is holy." This is the same line Moses heard in Exodus 3 from the angel of the Lord. Then in Joshua 6:2, the narrator flat out says that this commander is Yahweh himself. You get the same thing in Zechariah 1, where the angel of Yahweh receives reports from horsemen about the state of the earth. He then intercedes for Jerusalem, just like the Messiah in Isaiah 53. God replies with gracious and comforting words. The messenger is loved by God, yet clearly shares his same authority. So just who is this messenger?
This section presents more examples that strongly emphasize the angel's divine nature, particularly the commander of Yahweh's army and the angel in Zechariah. Let's examine Joshua 5, 13 through 15 and Joshua 6, verse 2. Joshua encounters a man with a drawn sword. When asked, "Are you for us or for our enemies?" he replies, "Neither, but as commander of the army of the Lord, I have now come." Joshua immediately falls to his face and worships and is told, "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy." That's Joshua 5, verse 15. This is the exact command Moses received from the angel of the Lord, who then identified as God at the burning bush. That was in Exodus 3, verse 5. This direct parallel is a powerful link. Then in Joshua 6, verse 2, the narrative overtly states, "Then the Lord, Yahweh, said to Joshua, 'See, I have delivered Jericho into your hands, along with its king and its fighting men.'" The speaker shifts from the commander to the Lord, implicitly equating the two. This passage is indeed one of the most compelling pieces of evidence that the angel of the Lord, or a figure like him, is Yahweh in a manifest form. Worship is accepted, holy ground is declared, and the narrative interchangeability is explicit. This commander of the Lord's army is not just a messenger, he's Yahweh in a military aspect, taking charge of the impending battle. Then he brings up Zechariah 1, 7 through 17. Here, Zechariah sees a vision of a horseman among myrtle trees, and then the angel of the Lord. The angel receives reports from horsemen who have patrolled the earth. That's Zechariah 1, verse 11. Then the angel of the Lord intercedes for Jerusalem and the towns of Judah, asking, "How long will you withhold mercy?" That's Zechariah 1, verse 12. And then the Lord, Yahweh, replied with gracious and comforting words to the angel who talked with me. That's Zechariah 1, verse 13. This passage is fascinating because it seems to show the angel of the Lord distinct from Yahweh, praying to Yahweh, and Yahweh responding to him. This complicates the argument that the angel is Yahweh. If the angel is Yahweh, why would he intercede to himself. This suggests a hierarchical relationship where the angel is a powerful, authoritative divine being, but still distinct from and subordinate to the ultimate Yahweh. This could be interpreted as the angel functioning as a celestial advocate, a role taken by Jesus in the New Testament in 1 John 2, verse 1. We have an advocate with the Father, Jesus Christ, the righteous one. So while it challenges the strict angel is Yahweh equation, it could support the angel is pre-incarnate Christ idea, as Christ also intercedes to the Father. However, it also fits neatly into the divine council framework, where divine beings serve Yahweh and might even act as intercessors on behalf of humanity, a common trope in ancient Near Eastern mythology. The presenter makes a passing reference to Isaiah 53 here, stating the angel intercedes just like the Messiah in Isaiah 53. Isaiah 53 describes the suffering servant who makes intercession for the transgressors. That's Isaiah 53, verse 12. But it doesn't mention an angel and is generally understood to be a prophetic description of the Messiah's atoning work, not a direct interaction with the angel of the Lord. This seems like a slight overreach in connecting disparate prophecies. So, the evidence is indeed compelling for the angel of the Lord being a unique, highly authoritative, and intensely manifest divine being, often interchangeable with Yahweh. The question remains, is he ontologically identical to Yahweh as a distinct person of the Trinity? Or is he a unique divine agent or manifestation of Yahweh's presence? The final piece of the presenter's argument hinges on the prophet Malachi, claiming a direct prophecy that only Jesus can fulfill. This is where he attempts to definitively reveal the secret identity. Is Malachi the key? And does it lock us into a single interpretation, or does it open up more questions about messianic prophecy and its fulfillment? We're about to find out.
Let's take a look at Malachi 3:1. Behold, I send my messenger, and the Lord whom you seek will suddenly come to his temple, the messenger of the covenant, in whom you delight. Behold, he is coming. This messenger of the covenant is clearly divine. He's called Ha-Adon in Hebrew, a title used exclusively for God. The phrase messenger of the covenant directly connects back to Judges 2:1, where the angel of Yahweh says, I brought you out of Egypt and brought you into the land I swore to give to your fathers. I will never break my covenant with you. He's the one who made the covenant, and now he's coming back to enforce it in person. And guess what? Only Jesus fills Malachi's prophecy about the messenger of the covenant suddenly coming to his temple. That temple was destroyed in 70 AD. So whoever this figure is, he had to show up before then. There's no rebuilt temple coming anytime soon. If it wasn't Jesus, this prophecy failed. All throughout the Old Testament, there is a consistent pattern. A divine figure who is both Yahweh and from Yahweh. He forgives sins, judges evil, leads God's armies, receives worship, and prepares the way. This isn't just a mere angel. This is Emmanuel, God with us.
The presenter concludes his argument by linking the angel of the Lord directly to the prophecy in Malachi, claiming that only Jesus fulfills it. This is a very common interpretive strategy in Christian theology, establishing continuity between the Old Testament and the New Testament figure of Christ. Let's dissect Malachi 3, verse 1. It says, See, I will send my messenger who will prepare the way before me. Then suddenly the Lord you are seeking will come to his temple. The messenger of the covenant, whom you desire, will come, says the Lord Almighty. The presenter emphasizes several key points. One is that this could refer to a human prophet, like John the Baptist, whom the New Testament explicitly identifies with this role in Mark 1, verse 2, and Luke 7, verse 27. 2, the presenter states that this Hebrew title, Ha-Adon, is used exclusively for God. This is generally true. Ha-Adon is indeed a strong divine title for Yahweh. So this Lord is clearly divine and is coming to his temple. And then 3, this crucial linking phrase, the messenger of the covenant. The presenter connects it to Judges 2, verse 1, where the angel of the Lord states, I brought you up out of Egypt and led you into the land I swore to give to your ancestors. I said, I will never break my covenant with you. The implication is that the angel of the Lord made the covenant and is now returning to enforce it. The argument is that these three figures in Malachi 3:1, the initial messenger, the Lord, and the messenger of the covenant, represent a complex prophecy that points to Jesus. The messenger preparing the way is John the Baptist, and the Lord who comes to his temple and the messenger of the covenant are Jesus, implying Jesus is the divine figure equivalent to the angel of the Lord. Now let's consider the counterpoints and nuances. First, with regard to the identity of my messenger. The New Testament explicitly identifies the first messenger as John the Baptist, a human prophet. That's from Matthew 11, verse 10, Mark 1, verse 2, and Luke 7, verse 27. This already creates a distinction between the messenger who prepares the way and the Lord who comes. Then let's consider the messenger of the covenant. While this phrase certainly echoes the angel of the Lord's role in Judges 2, verse 1, it's also a descriptive title. The covenant itself is Yahweh's, and his messenger could simply be the one sent to deliver or enforce its terms. It doesn't automatically mean the messenger is the covenant maker, but rather the one who embodies and delivers its message. And then with regard to Ha'adan, yes, this is a divine title for Yahweh, but if the Lord, Ha'adan, who comes to his temple is Yahweh, then it still leaves open the question of who the messenger of the covenant is. The grammar can be read as a further description of the Lord or as a distinct yet intimately connected figure. And then let's look at Jesus and the temple. The argument that only Jesus fulfills this prophecy because the temple was destroyed in 70 AD is a common one. Jesus certainly did come to the temple and cleansed it. That's from Matthew 21, 12 through 13, Mark 11, 15 through 17, and Luke 19, 45 through 46, and also John 2, verses 13 through 17. However, the prophecy doesn't explicitly state that this is the only or final fulfillment, nor does it preclude a future, perhaps spiritual fulfillment. The destruction of the physical temple is indeed a historical fact, but tying the entire prophecy's validity to a singular pre-70 AD appearance of Jesus is a specific theological interpretation, not the only possible reading of prophetic literature, which often has multiple or symbolic fulfillments. The presenter concludes by summarizing that all throughout the Old Testament there is a consistent pattern, a divine figure who is both Yahweh and from Yahweh. He forgives sins, judges evil, leads God's armies, receives worship, and prepares the way. This isn't just a mere angel, this is Emmanuel, God with us. While the angel of the Lord is undeniably a unique, highly authoritative, and profoundly manifest divine being, often appearing interchangeably with Yahweh, it's important to differentiate between divine manifestation or agency and pre-incarnate Jesus, which is the Trinitarian view. With regard to divine manifestation, the angel of the Lord is a unique, temporary, or mediating form of Yahweh's presence through which the transcendent God interacts with humanity. In this view, the angel is Yahweh in a functional, revelatory sense, but not necessarily a distinct person within a Trinitarian framework. He is Yahweh's active, visible presence. This accounts for the worship, the divine speech, and the identity blurring without requiring a separate divine person. For example, in Isaiah 6:1, Isaiah sees the Lord, Adonai, seated on a throne, and hears seraphim calling out, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty." In John 12:41, later interprets this as Isaiah seeing Jesus' glory. This points to a concept of Yahweh's glory or manifestation, which later New Testament authors equated with Christ, without the Old Testament author necessarily understanding a distinct pre-existent person. Of course, there's also the pre-incarnate Jesus or the Trinitarian view. This is that the angel of the Lord is the second person of the Trinity, Jesus Christ, making appearances before his birth. This view brings a strong sense of theological continuity and supports the co-equality and pre-existence of Christ. The evidence for the angel of the Lord's divinity is very strong within the Old Testament. He is clearly not just a mere angel in the modern sense of a created angelic being. He is intimately connected to Yahweh's authority, presence, and his very identity. The crucial interpretive choice is whether this profound connection points to a unique mode of Yahweh's self-revelation and active presence in the world, which would be divine manifestation or agency, or a distinct pre-existent person of a multi-personal God, which would be the Trinitarian interpretation. The Old Testament, on its own terms, does not explicitly articulate a multi-personal God. It just does not. That doctrine is a later theological development derived from New Testament interpretations of figures like the angel of the Lord, God's Spirit, and wisdom, and then retroactively applied to the Hebrew Bible. While the phenomena described in the Old Testament can be interpreted through a Trinitarian lens, the text itself, without that later framework, can also be understood as a singular, transcendent God manifesting in various powerful, embodied ways. The secret identity of the angel of the Lord, then, might not be a secret at all, but rather a profound mystery of how an utterly transcendent God chose to interact directly with his creation through a figure so intimately connected to him that the lines blurred. Whether that blurring is a hint at complex divine personhood or a unique expression of divine agency is the question that continues to spark debate, and one that requires careful, critical reading of the text without imposing later theological constructs too hastily. As I did in the previous videos in this series, I want to make it very clear that I am an atheist, of course. So on one hand, you can say, why do I care? Because this is doctrinal bickering between those who believe in a Trinity or those who don't, or those who believe that the Trinity is represented in the Old Testament or those who don't. And I don't have a particular dog in the fight. I don't care if you think that baptism is required or not for salvation. I don't care if you think that the communion is the actual physical body of Christ transmuted in your hands or not. I mean, these are all doctrinal questions that you can argue about ad infinitum. And I don't deeply care about whether or not you believe in the Trinity or not. And as we've seen today, there are admittedly verses that you can interpret as the Trinity if you want. And if you want to tell me that, that's fine. But if you want to tell me that it is just clear as day that the Trinity is in the Old Testament, you aren't reading very carefully. And yes, I'm going to say it, Christians, you're not reading it in context. The way that God, Yahweh, interacts with people via this angel of the Lord throughout the text is complex, and it is not easy to understand whether you apply a Trinitarian lens or not. But I can tell you from experience that I did learn from just reading the text that God has a divinity, a name that he can put in these creatures, like the angel of the Lord. And he does on numerous occasions. Does that account for everything? You can be the judge of that. But if you want to read the Trinity into this, that's fine. I just am opposed to people who want to present this as though it's obvious and it's settled and this is the doctrine. And if you don't believe it, then you're not a Christian and you don't understand God and you don't understand the Bible and the Old Testament makes no sense. That is ridiculous. You don't even have to have the Trinity at all to make sense of the passages that they're talking about here in the Old Testament. And as I've said before, if you took someone off the street who had never been exposed to Christianity and they had no presupposed view put on them of the Trinity, they never heard of the Trinity, and you handed them the Old Testament for the first time in their life, and you said, here, sit down and read it from the first page of Genesis to the last page of the book. There is not a single person, if you give it to 1 million people to do this, there is not a single person who, if they had no presuppositions coming into the text, would then come out of the text and say, this is a Trinity. Nobody would say that. Even directly after the death of Christ, nobody was saying that. It took decades for people to start putting together this theological doctrine, and it took centuries in order for them to codify it. So at least understand it for what it is. If you want to believe in the Trinity, that's great. But just don't throw it around as though it's this obvious written in stone fact that can't be debated, because it very much is up for debate if you read the text honestly without putting on your Trinitarian lenses before you sit down to read. Thank you once again for joining me here on my channel, Skepticus. This is your boy, Adam of NOLA, and this is part of my series called Cynical Sermons. This specific mini-series, I have been replying to these videos that have been put out by Testify. I do want to say that I think that the videos are well thought out, and they do very clearly articulate the Trinitarian position of how they make all these tie-ins and how they claim that the Trinity exists in the Old Testament. I don't have a problem with him or anyone else who voices this view. The only problem that I have is this kind of smug tone that says, oh, this is the only way it makes sense, and this is the only interpretation. And he just kind of hand waves away many other interpretations that have been put in place, not just by Unitarian Christians, but actually by the Jews who have been studying and wrote this text originally many millennia ago. Because they don't agree with that interpretation, there are actually Christians out there who don't agree with this interpretation, and it is just that, an interpretation. But again, thank you for joining me. I hope you like, subscribe, do all the things. If I've said anything that was wrong or has ticked anyone off, Yahweh, do you want to chime in here and correct me on anything? Angel of the Lord too. I mean, if the angel of the Lord just wants to come down and say a few words. Anything? Okay. Well, there you go. The angel of the Lord has endorsed this, as has Yahweh and Jebus. So, yay me. So I hope that you enjoyed the video. I hope to see you on future videos. And until that time, lo, I say unto you, stay skeptical.